Hi, everyone. I'm going to reintroduce myself if you weren't here before. My name is Jeff Moser, and I'm editor-in-chief of Passage Maker Magazine. Welcome. Today, we are talking about the Florida Loop, a bite-sized adventure on America's Great Loop. And with us today is Kimberly Russo. Kim was named director of America's Great Loop Cruisers Association in 2015 and has been with AGLCA since 2009. Kim is both a gold looper as well as a legacy looper, meaning she's a second-generation gold looper. Today, we will be talking about the quiet backwater groves, the many islands, and the bustling cities of the Florida Loop, a shorter, manageable cruising route that offers many of the same experiences as the Great Loop on a smaller scale. Kim will cover the basic route, a sample itinerary, and why the Florida Loop is ideal test cruise for future loopers. I'm going to give you a reminder now. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. I'm going to keep an eye on it, and hopefully we will definitely have some time for a few at the end of the webinar. One more thing, this webinar will be live on our website at passagemaker.com soon after the broadcast. With that, I cede the floor to Kim. Thanks. Hello, Kim.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me, and thanks to the Passage Maker team for setting this up and putting this on. Thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I appreciate the warm welcome from Jeff, and we're just kind of going to jump right into it. What we're going to do today is talk about the Florida Mini Loop, and we're going to talk about why it is a wonderful adventure as kind of a test cruise for the Great Loop. We get lots and lots of questions from people who really want a way to try out the Great Loop before they sign up to spend, up to a year or more cruising around the entire eastern part of the US on their boats. So the Florida Mini Loop is one opportunity where you can try out a lot of the skills and the lifestyle that you'll encounter on the Great Loop. So we're going to focus on that. We're going to explain what the Florida Loop is, where you'll go, and some of the skills and things you'll get to try out, and give you a sample itinerary. I do want to make sure I'm clear that this is just one of probably an unlimited number of stops you can make in this southern tip of Florida. So the most important thing is that anybody doing this kind of long distance cruising, just make the trip your own and do it in a way that works for you. So let's kind of jump in by defining what is this Florida Mini Loop. It's approximately 500 statute miles. You can see it there on the map. So it's circumnavigating that very southernmost tip of the Florida Peninsula. One of the obstacles we hear from many people about setting out and doing the entire Great Loop is that they just don't have the time available. Whether you're still working, whether you are caring for elderly parents, whatever that time obstacle might be, this particular loop does not have to take very long. The sample itinerary we're going to show today is 7 cruising days. That said, you can do it much more slowly than that, and I will try to point out some of the places where you could take one of the legs that we're showing you on an itinerary and break that up into multiple legs to extend the trip. Depending on your boat, the speed of your boat, how fast you like to cruise, it certainly is possible to do this at faster than a week if you're willing to put in some long days. So really within your control how long you can spend on this adventure. What kind of vessel do you need? Well, I have here anything that is seaworthy, and the seaworthy part should go without saying, but if you look at the map, you will see there are sections where you really are in open water. So on the Great Loop, there are some open water stretches, but it is mostly inland and protected. On the 500 miles or so of the Florida Loop, you are spending a good bit of time in unprotected water. So the seaworthiness is key. That said, on the Great Loop, you're spending a heck of a lot more time, months, if not years, on the boat. So the comfort and livability of the boat is very important. Whereas on the Florida Loop, if you're going to spend a week or maybe 2 weeks or a month, the livability of the boat for long distance is not quite important. So you could do this in a center console. I mean, you can do the Great Loop in a center console, but you just need to make sure that you have prepared for how and where you'll make your nighttime stops and things like that if you're in kind of a non-traditional long distance cruising vessel. But that said, you can probably do this a lot more quickly in some of the boats that you wouldn't normally picture as a Great Loop boat. The season for this, you really can do the Florida Loop at any time of year, and that is one of the beauties of it because the weather is generally favorable in this area year round. That said, we all know summer is hurricane season and storms have been pretty intense over the last few years in the Florida Peninsula. depending on when and how you're doing this, we do get a lot of notice that hurricanes are on the way. So you can alter your plans if needed based on that. So it's not impossible to do it in the summer. You just certainly need to plan for the what if a hurricane happens to be headed for the area you're in. The other drawback about doing this in the summer is that the water levels on Lake Okeechobee are drawn down in the summer, and that's to allow the sun to come through and replenish, my understanding, replenish the growth on the bottom of the lake is part of it. So right now, or last time I checked in the last week or so, the water level there was so low that larger cruising boats probably would have a really hard time making it through. That said, if you are doing this in a smaller boat, if you only draw a few feet, the lake level on Lake Okeechobee is probably not going to be an issue. So again, you can really do this any time of year. Those are some of the considerations if you are choosing to do it in the summertime. Starting point, you can start this anywhere. It is a loop, so it doesn't matter where you start. You're just going to go around until you reach your starting point again. And the direction of travel on the Great Loop, if you're familiar, typically you're traveling counterclockwise. With the Florida Loop, it really doesn't matter which way you choose to do it. There's no strong river currents that you have to deal with. The biggest currents are going to come from the tides, and those are going to be going in both directions at different times of day. So there's no real need to go in either direction. For the sake of this, when we did this route, we started from Fort Myers. So that's where I'm going to start, but don't take that as, the must start place for the loop, for the Florida Loop. So the basic waterways you will go through, you'll have the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway. You'll also spend some time out in the open water of the Gulf. You will, of course, go through the Keys, and the waterway there is the Intracoastal. But this section here is the Florida Bay. And along the Keys, you also have the option to go kind of on the outside here. There are some advantages and disadvantages to both of those choices, and we'll talk about them when we cover that leg. You'll work your way northward if you're going counterclockwise on the Atlantic Intracoastal, and then you'll turn into the Okeechobee Waterway, and that encompasses the full loop. One of the reasons we say this is a great way to kind of test your mettle, if you will, for the Great Loop, you will anchor, most likely, unless you have a very fast boat and choose not to anchor. There are stretches where anchorage is going to probably be the most viable option for stopping overnight, so you will get the experience of anchoring in tidal conditions. You could potentially be anchoring in kind of muddy looking water in some of the marshes. You can anchor in crystal clear water in the Keys, and you can even try out mooring balls in the Keys. So that's kind of another thing that in everyday cruising, depending on where you're from, you may not necessarily do. And overnight anchoring is a whole different animal than anchoring for an afternoon while you're just, enjoying some swimming and things like that from the boat. So it's one of the things that I hear from a lot of want-to-be loopers that concerns them is overnight anchoring. So you'll have several opportunities to try that out if you decide to do the Florida Mini Loop. You will also have plenty of opportunities to try docking in unfamiliar places. Again, with different tide, different current, finding your way in and out of a harbor. You can anchor pretty much all the time on this loop if you choose to. That said, you most likely will be coming into docks for provisioning, water, pump out, whatever it might be. So most likely you're going to dock at least a few times if you're doing the Florida Mini Loop. You will also get to experience locks, which is another thing that loopers who have only done kind of local cruising, if they're a lake boater or just don't live in an area where locks are necessary to navigate the waterway, you may never have done a lock, and that can be a little bit intimidating at first for some. So you have the opportunity to test out 5 locks on sometimes 6, on the Okeechobee Waterway to complete this loop. So it's a great proving ground for your locking skills. And then probably most importantly, you can experience the lifestyle of long distance cruising. So you may have spent a lot of time on your boat, and you may have done weekends on your boat, but continually living aboard and cruising is just kind of a different lifestyle. So you'll learn, what it's like to be exploring. You'll find out more about what it's like to provision in unfamiliar places where you're arriving without ground transportation. If you're going to do this in about a week, you certainly could provision ahead of time. And that's what most of us do when we're spending time on our boats, if it's not a true live aboard situation. But you can use this experience to figure out, okay, I'm in a new town, I don't have a car, I need A, B, and C. How am I going to obtain that? And you can also, test out the lifestyle of planning your next days or your next movement of the boat, where a lot of us, kind of go to the same place every weekend and just anchor and enjoy being on the boat. When you're trying to pick where to go next, checking on the waterway conditions, checking on bridge openings, planning that next day's cruise, it is a little bit different than when you're constantly cruising in familiar waters. So those are some of the things that are very prevalent on the Great Loop that the mini loop in Florida will give you some experience in. So next we will jump into a possible itinerary. Yep, let me back up a little bit. All right, so as I said, one example, probably limitless choices here, but travel day one as a possible itinerary. Leaving from Fort Myers, the destination on this day was the Everglades, and this is our actual track. So you may be able to see kind of the time stamps on how long this cruise took us. As you leave Fort Myers, if that is your starting point, or as you cruise through Fort Myers on this Florida mini loop, as you reach kind of Fort Myers Beach in the Cape Coral area, very busy boating area. The area where the Caloosahatchee River there intersects with the Gulf is known as the Miserable Mile, because there is so much boat traffic through there. So keep that in mind. Depending on your style of boating, if you prefer not to be on crowded waters, you may not want to tackle this particular leg on a weekend because the boating traffic will be much more substantial. But you will cruise your way south. You can take the intracoastal for part of it. You can be on the open water. If you don't want to do a 70-mile day, or you're just not in a hurry and you want to explore different places, there are several potential stops here, including Naples and Marco Island, which are certainly very popular stops. As you look to end this leg, where we ended it was in the Everglades, and we chose an Anchorage. There are also some marinas down there in Everglades City, but if you have a deeper draft, they may be a little bit more challenging to get into. So consider that as you're planning and looking at the different harbors or anchorages that you might use. But just a few visuals of this this leg. Sorry about that. Beautiful sunset at the anchorage that we chose. And this is the kind of waterway you're going to see for most of the way through. Pretty remote, not a whole lot going on the shoreline once you leave the Fort Myers Cape Coral area. And then, as I said, you can wind up the day in a beautiful, serene anchorage watching the sunset. Excuse me. Okay, possible day two. You've experienced anchoring, you've set the hook, you've set your anchor alarm so that you know if you're dragging. And because of the timing we have today, we're going to cover the very high level. This is not going to be a detailed navigation seminar of this, but we're just kind of trying to show you where you'll go and alert you to the things that you're going to want to look into before you go. So before you anchor for the night, you're going to want to take some anchoring courses, make sure that you have the proper equipment, and make sure that you know how to know if something's going wrong. So for an example, an anchor alarm. So day two, we're starting from the Everglades. As I said, we had an anchorage. Everglades City, you can probably see it on your version, is kind of up in this area. So if you have chosen a marina, you're coming out through there. This leg is a 90-mile day. It also can be broken up into multiple days. Most likely, if you break it up into multiple days, you're going to be looking at anchorages kind of in the Everglades area. This is an open water passage for most of the time. So you always want to be checking your weather apps, right, when you're out there on the water, but you absolutely want to double check, triple check when you're doing an open water passage like this, because it will not be pleasant if you pick the wrong day. It will likely be safe. Usually the boats can handle a lot more than the people on the boats can handle. But as somebody who gets seasick, I can tell you that I missed a good portion of this passage because a friend had given me some seasick medicine she swore by, and it made me so tired I fell asleep and missed a good bit of this. So that was kind of sad because it is a beautiful passage. And I can show you some of the pictures that I did grab before I just completely zonked out on that. But so good weather is going to be the key here, but you'll be cruising through beautiful grounds. I do want to note that particularly if you choose an anchorage in this area, let me back up to the slide. A lot of this is part of the Everglades National Park. There is a very specific boater education course that the Everglades National Park requires. You do it online. It's very short. It's very easy. I don't know how they monitor to find out if you've taken it unless they're boarding you for another reason. But we certainly encourage you to cruise by the letter and spirit of the law or the regulation. And in this case, just Google for the Everglades National Park Boater Education course and you'll find it. But if you plan to be in the Everglades National Park, which follows this whole area of the coastline into the Florida Bay, you're going to want to take that course. So keep that in mind. But your ultimate destination on this leg is the Keys, which beautiful aqua water. That is the 7-mile bridge that runs from Marathon out towards Key West. This is a marina we were coming into in Marathon. You will feel every bit, if you've never been to the Keys and haven't experienced it, you will feel every bit like you are in the Bahamas or the Caribbean, even though you're still in the US. It is very tropical. You'll have outdoor restaurants, you'll have outdoor bars, there's lots of live music. It is just an absolute tropical atmosphere. And a lot of loopers describe Keys disease, where they go to the Keys expecting to spend a couple weeks and end up, a few months later, they realize they're still there and maybe it's time to start moving on. Marathon is a looper favorite. There are lots of marinas and mooring balls there. Key West is also a looper favorite. Key West has a little bit more of the party atmosphere, but a little bit more history there as well. Marathon is a little bit more quiet. One of the highlights is a turtle hospital that is there that you can check out. But those are the two kind of primary keys that a lot of loopers do. When you have wrapped up your time in the Keys and you're ready to head on, for us on a possible itinerary, this is travel day 3, and we went from Marathon to the lower part of Biscayne Bay. It was about 95 miles. Again, not mandatory to do these days. If you're on a faster boat, these may seem like short days to you, but there may be things you want to see in between. If you're on a slower boat, a sailboat, or a trawler, a 95-mile day may sound like something you were just not up for because this is supposed to be pleasure boating. You make the call. As you can see from the green line, we are following the chain of islands of the Keys just on up towards Biscayne Bay. Stop where you'd like. Make this as many days as you'd like. Unless you have to get back to work or get back to something else, there is just no reason to be in a hurry. There are 2 choices as you're leaving the Keys and heading towards Miami. You can take the more protected inside route here, which is the green line, which we did, or you can go on the outside. The outside is, of course, less protected. It's going to require better sea state, better conditions for the weather, but it is much deeper. The inside route is known for some shoaling and some shallow areas. We draw about 3.5 feet. We had no problem. It is a very well-marked area. As you're on the intracoastal, you can see some of the markers there. You can also see how spectacular the water is here. And as you continue northward, you're getting into a little bit less of the tropical look and feel to the water, and you've got a lot more mangroves. You'll see this all throughout the Keys, actually, though, too. But as I said, well-marked channel, and our stopping point for this night was in Anchorage in that lower part of Biscayne Bay. There were other boats there. Although the water in this picture doesn't seem to have that beautiful like aqua color, it was still crystal clear, and we dropped the hook and we could see it from the boat, which is in most places on the Great Loop a little bit unusual. So a beautiful area. Okay, travel day 4. And I'm calling these travel days. We took several days at each of the stops in most cases. And as I've already said, you can do these in more or fewer days. So just a rule of thumb kind of itinerary. Excuse me. So on this day, we're going from the Anchorage there in the lower part of Biscayne Bay. We are approaching Miami, going through the upper part of Biscayne Bay near Miami. And for us, our stop was a little bit of a side trip on the New River in Fort Lauderdale. So a side trip is going to be anything that you diverge from the path of the loop and then have to backtrack to get back to the loop itself. So that kind of definition, if you will, of a side trip applies to this Florida mini loop, and it applies to the Great Loop as well. If you're a person who likes cities, for me, there's something really exciting about being in a city or being close to a city, and approaching it from the water is really kind of just you can really kind of dive into that excitement that you feel about approaching a big city. Very cloudy, obviously, on this day, but you can see Miami there in the distance. And as we're getting closer, you can see it even more clearly. You'll see lots of cruise ships. Biscayne Bay is a very busy harbor. So again, if you don't want a lot of company out there, try not to travel on a weekend through this area. There's plenty of more remote areas or less populated areas that you can spend the weekends doing if you don't want a lot of company on the water. We chose to continue through Miami. That upper part of Biscayne Bay has got a lot of restrictions on anchoring. It's becoming a little bit less boating friendly in that upper part of Biscayne Bay. There are certain parts around the Venetian Islands in Biscayne Bay where you cannot anchor overnight. So if you choose to anchor in Biscayne Bay, just check your charts and your cruising guides and make sure you're not choosing a spot where you can't anchor overnight. Dockage has also become very expensive and somewhat scarce. So there are places you can still anchor in Biscayne Bay. Just make sure that you check the local regulations before you do so. We chose to continue on through. The new river was absolutely a spectacular little kind of mini side trip. It's just a few miles up. Oh, that's an example of, some of the busy harbors you'll see in Biscayne Bay. But this is the new river. It's a twisting, winding river that kind of follows the Fort Lauderdale River Walk. There is actually affordable dockage here. There are a few marinas that are owned by the city of Fort Lauderdale, and as such, they keep the dockage somewhat reasonable, depending on where you're from, where your perspective lies on that. But you will dock in the heart of everything you know about Fort Lauderdale. You can walk the river walk, fabulous restaurants, great shopping. When we stopped there, the waterfront park, it was close to St. Patrick's Day, and they had a big St. Patrick's Day festival going on and a parade. So it was just a really fun stop. One note of caution, there are a few low bridges if you're coming up the New River that most looping type boats will have to have opened. I think the lowest one is probably 16 feet when it is closed. No problem. They open on request. However, these on the New River do not open between 7:30 a.m. and 9 a.m. And again, they won't open between 4:30 and 6 p.m. for boat traffic. So why is this important? If you've looked at some of the times that we tend to leave 7:30 in the morning. If you're looking at our little charts there of where we went. So plan ahead for that. You either need to be off of the New River and outside those bridges before 7:30 or after 9. And it's just simply because of the car traffic in the area. They just won't open those bridges during rush hour. So plan accordingly for that. And then once you are finished with the New River, the next stop is Fort Lauderdale to Stewart. This is another long day for us. It was 85 miles. So many places you can stop. You could break this up into several days, stopping at several very boating friendly towns. So don't take our long day, to mean that there's nothing to see between there, because there absolutely is. This area will be categorized, especially as you're leaving Fort Lauderdale, just by the opulence of some of these waterfront houses. Note that there will be some of the same types of bridges that I mentioned that you will have to request openings. Many bridges open on demand. In this area, there are a few that open on a schedule. So certainly check your cruising guides to find out about that, because if you are preparing to leave tomorrow and there is a bridge that is 2 miles away that you are going to have opened, you don't want to, drop the lines and head out at 8 a.m. if the bridge is not going to open again until 9 a.m. So just as an example, you're going to want to know when those bridges open if they're on a schedule, and try to arrive for the scheduled opening. It's much easier to wait at a marina, wait at an anchorage until you're going to arrive at the right time for the opening. Once you hit the first bridge and have arrived and the bridge is open and you go through, the rest are timed pretty well accordingly for kind of a slow pace to the next bridge. So, if one opens at 15 past the hour, the next one will open at 30 minutes past the hour, for example, to allow for a smooth progression there. But just something to note and something to plan for when you're doing your cruise planning for the next day, or for that day if you do your cruise planning in the morning. Stewart's is known as the Crossroads. It is a very popular boating place because it is where the Okeechobee Waterway intersects with the Intracoastal Waterway. It is also a place that is popular for a jumping off to the Bahamas if you're going to make that crossing. Also on this leg, I note that you will go through West Palm and Palm Beach. So there are some security zones for Mar-a-Lago in that area. So just stay away and just know that they're there and be on the lookout for that. So at this point, we have reached Stewart, and there are lots of options for dockage. And oh, I didn't show you the pictures. There's a few pictures of that leg. And as you can see, the closer you get to Stewart, the more pristine and fewer high rises like you'll see in Fort Lauderdale. So we're ready for the Okeechobee now, which means we are also ready to start some locks. The mileage here will vary because there's really kind of a lot of options for stopping, even in Stewart, depending on where you start. Your mileage will be different for your stopping point. But you will most likely on this day have your first 2 locks of this trip. This is a picture from inside of a lock. I believe this is the Ortona lock. Nope, might be the Port Mayaka lock. Anyway, I'm terrible with remembering the names of each one. But you have 2. One as you leave Stewart, it's the Port St. Lucie lock. And then this one as you arrive at Lake Okeechobee. So if you've never done a lock, fear not. It is really pretty simple. I think when people fear it, it's more of a fear of the unknown than pretty much anything else. You will be prepared. Prepare yourself for the lock. You will put your fenders out. You will be wearing your PFDs. These are pretty easy locks as your starting point if this is your first lock ever. The other thing you should know is that these lock masters are pretty used to this being people's first lock ever. So they are very patient and explicit with instructions if you need additional information. So don't be afraid to ask. On these locks, they actually drop a line down to you that is secured to the top of the lock wall. You bring that line back to your boat. So you may need a boat hook depending on how close to the wall you are and your boat's configuration. But you'll bring that line back to the boat and you will tuck it under one horn of the cleat typically. That gives you a little bit of leverage. You want to keep the boat close to the wall, fenders out. Hopefully you're not grinding against the wall. We're trying to avoid that. You don't have to be flat up against the wall. You just want to have control of the boat on that side of the lock. So you've got the line, you wrap it on one horn of the cleat. You typically are not going to ever want to tie down the line because then if it gets caught, as the water level changes, it becomes very tight immediately and very hard, if not impossible, to untie. Becomes an unsafe situation. You may have to cut that line. So don't tie it down. Just use the cleat for some leverage to hold the boat to the wall. In these locks, typically the crew member, if you've got 2 people aboard, the crew member is going to take the first line at the bow, secure on the cleats, and then at least for our boat, you're going to have to figure out what works for your boat, but this is pretty typical for, our boat is 41 feet. The person driving is typically going to leave the helm, go to the stern, and get another line to bring back to the boat so that the boat is secured bow and stern. That's typically how it's done. This isn't really a seminar on locks, so there's a few other details, but that really is the basis of it. When the water level has risen or fallen, the doors will start to open. That'll be your clue that it's almost time to exit the lock. The lock master will let you know when you can leave, and you will continue on your way. So you will do 2 locks this day, and this is the second lock. And this is the second lock opening. As you leave the second lock, you are right out on Lake Okeechobee. This is another day that you are going to want to plan ahead to be crossing under the right conditions. We've already kind of mentioned that Lake Okeechobee can be rather shallow. Because it's a large lake and it's shallow, any wind coming across the lake can kick up some pretty decent sized waves that you might not expect and make it pretty uncomfortable. Our dog got seasick all the way across Lake Okeechobee, so it is not always a comfortable experience for the people or the pets. So just watch your weather forecast, do some weather checking, and make sure you're picking a day that's not going to be miserable for everybody aboard. There are 2 routes through Lake Okeechobee. The one that you can see, let me back up a little bit. The one you can see here is what's considered going straight across. There's also a rim route that takes you closer to the southern rim. Really no good or bad choice there, but you can do some checking in your cruising guides and charts and make a decision of which of those is your preference. But as you make it to the other side, let me go back to the picture. Sorry about that. There's several potential stopping points here on the west side of the lake. Almost immediately after the crossing, there is a little town here called Clewiston. There is another lock there. I mentioned you could potentially have 6 locks. There is a very small lock leading into a marina there. Sometimes the doors are just open and you just float right through. We've been there when that's happened. We've also been there when it was tended, and you did have to lock through in the traditional way. So if you're going into a marina in that area, you will have that additional lock. As you can kind of see from this, we did not stop on this day in Clewiston. We had made great times, so we decided to push on a little further. Moorhaven is another very viable stop. There is another lock here in Moorhaven, so if you've made great time, if it's early in the day and you want to get another one of the remaining 3 locks out of the way, that can be a pretty good idea to do that. And that's what we did. All right, final day. If you stopped at Clewiston, if you stopped at Moorhaven, whatever that may have been, we are working our way back to Fort Myers, which is where we started. 3 more, well, depending on where you stop, 2 or 3 more locks that you have the opportunity to practice. By the time you get through the Franklin lock, which is the last one, you're going to be feeling like a pro. It's no longer going to seem like a big deal to you. Keep in mind that all of our infrastructure, locks included, is aging, and there are, I will say occasionally, but it seems to be more often, there have been problems with some of the locks, and the Okeechobee locks have not been spared from those problems. So there were a few issues earlier this year where some of the doors were having issues, and therefore they had to lower the beam, maximum beam that they could let through, because they couldn't get one of the doors open in a lock. So if you have a catamaran or something along that line, that would affect you. For most boats, it was not a problem, but you're going to want to learn to check the Army Corps of Engineers websites and sign up for the alerts that they have, so that you can be notified if there is a lock issue between you and where you want to be, because it does happen. Right now, most loopers are up on the Erie Canal, struggling through many lock closures due to flooding and debris in the water and things like that. It's been a really wet spring on the Erie Canal. It was very late opening for through navigation, and when it finally did, it was open for a few weeks, and now there's some sections closed again. So typically not closures like that on the Okeechobee, but it can happen. So it's just another thing that you need to be prepared for. And you also need to accept that some of these things are beyond your control. It is actually part of this type of cruising, and it tends to, in the end, make some of the best stories that you've got is about the time you were stuck in the Erie Canal, or you couldn't go through Port Mayaca Lock because one of the doors wouldn't open. So that is the final day. As I said, this was defined as 7 travel days. Could be many more, could be many less, and it can be as long as you would like in between the travels. So a couple of pictures from the Okeechobee. That is a railroad bridge that lifts. It is typically in this open position as you see it now, so it's not usually a challenge to have to wait for that to open. Very rural area. You are going through the swamps, lots of gators. I liked the picture, I liked the cows. So farmland as well. Super careful if you have furry friends, if you are anchoring and taking them off the boat for their potty breaks. The Okeechobee in particular is very known for having a lot of gators. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. This is one of the lower bridges, but if you look at the fender board here, it's actually, our overhead clearance, our air draft is about 18 or so feet. So we cleared this one. It just doesn't look like we will from this picture. So that is the very end in Fort Myers. This is an outdated picture. Sadly, this marina is no longer there. Hurricane Ian took that out. But that was our starting and ending point on this trip. So hopefully we've whet your appetite and kind of shown you how this can be a great trial run to see if the Great Loop might be for you and to gain some experience. I've set up a code that will waive if you'd like to join AGLCA. There's typically a $15 joining fee, and then I think the annual dues are like $79 or something. That code FL Loop will waive that $15 joining fee. You're also welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jeff and see if we have any questions.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to
You're
turn
welcome.
my camera on. I want to thank you, first of all, and thank our attendees. There's well over 100 of you in there, and I've seen hellos from Northern California, Texas, Canada, and really just about every state on the East Coast and the Southeast. So thank you for attending. One of the first questions I saw was your 7-day itinerary. What was your average travel speed on that trip, if you know?
Oh gosh, great question. Let me back up. Our typical travel speed is about 10 knots.
Okay.
On those longer days, we tend to go a little bit faster. One of the things that, and I probably won't be able to tell, but on these maps, they are actually color coded by our speed, but I don't recall what the different colors mean. I believe red is the slowest. Let me go back another one.
It's down there at the bottom. You have it.
Oh, it is. You're right. And it's a little bit small on my screen, so I can't quite see it. But so if you can see what those ranges are, and then if I kind of flip back through to the graphics, you can kind of see where we were able to go faster. I'm going to guess that yellow's a pretty fast. Oh, it's still on there. Yeah, yellow's one of the faster. Going across Lake Okeechobee, unless you're just trying to conserve fuel, which is always an added plus. There's no reason not to go fast in places like that. But then when you're, kind of meandering through a narrower waterway, you're certainly going to go slow down. And that's where we get into this green range.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now you mentioned Lake O's draft could be an issue and is an issue right now. What are we talking about for drafts that is it something over 4 feet we should really be concerned about? But maybe you can answer that.
That you actually probably hit the number. Anything over 4 feet, I would be real concerned. I think we're seeing depths, at last I checked, between 4 and 5 feet on some sections of Lake Okeechobee, and they were not expected to raise that level for several more weeks. And kind of, a word of caution when you're doing your research to check whether this is passable. The depths that you're going to see for Lake Okeechobee are measured, I believe, at like above sea level. So when it says 11 feet, it might not be 11 feet of water. The surface of the lake at that point may be 11 feet above sea level. It's a point of confusion for some, so just make sure you know what you're looking at. But the last depths I heard were in the the 4 to 5 foot range, which is certainly a challenge for some of the cruisers.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Another one, someone had asked, and I'm not sure if you can get an answer to this, but you think there's any companies that you know about that would allow a charter for, say, a 7-day Florida loop?
There are very few that I know of, and one or two that had been operating at one point are not. Either storm damage took out too much of their charter fleet. So I don't know that there are any that will let you do that particular trip. One of the things that's nice about this is that it's possible to trailer your boat if you have a boat to Florida to do this trip. Now, if it's trailerable, it may not have living quarters, so anchorages might be a problem. But you might be able to go fast enough, and in a smaller boat, some of those places like Everglades City that are more challenging with a deeper draft might be possible. So that is one possibility, is if you have a boat and you can trailer it there. I don't know of any charters in that particular area. Southwest Florida Yachts used to do them. I'm not sure that they still do, and I'm not sure if they would allow that whole navigation.
Got it. Thank you. Another Lake O question. Any anchorages on the lake?
Great question. There are a few. If you're doing the rim route, it is definitely possible. A couple of resources for that. Certainly your cruising guides. will show you, and Navionics, Aquamap, whatever tablet navigation you're using, usually will have those anchorages marked. There was also a pretty a YouTuber, Joe and Show, who did the Great Loop not too long ago, and they kind of did a guide to the Okeechobee Waterway. And they were in a slower trawler, and they did that rim route. So they've got some choices as well there for anchorages. So those are some resources you can look at for that.
Okay, great. How about refueling? Where do you think is the longest stretch where there's no refueling opportunities?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know. And fuel is pretty prevalent. I would have to say it's probably going to be on that second leg where we went kind of from the Everglades down to the Keys, because most of your choices there for an overnight stay, if you don't want to do that 95 miles, is going to be in Anchorage. And we actually anchored that night. So we basically, following our path, we would have had to go to from the Fort Myers Beach area all the way to Marathon. I believe there is fuel though in some other places. I'm not sure there is fuel in Naples and Marco Island. So you can kind of bounce a little bit further south if you think you're going to have a fuel concern. And then if you can get into Everglades City, you can take on fuel there as well. After that, it's really no problem. This is such a prevalent boating area that there's lots of fuel stops, and there are fuel stops close to both edges of Lake Okeechobee. So there's really no concern there.
Okay. All right. I don't see any of. Oh, I have one more question. I'm going to remind everyone that this will be available at passagemaker.com a few days after this presentation to take a look at this and the PowerPoint. Someone had asked, how did you put together these maps? Like, where did you get these images from?
Yes. Excuse me. That is a third-party app that we use called Nebo, Nebo. It is one of the kind of social boating apps that can show you where your boating buddies are. But one of the very lovely features of it is that after each day of cruising, you automatically are emailed a report like this. So those are just screenshots from the PDF that we get each day that we cruise. And actually the very first one that showed the whole route, I just put in the date range that we did the whole thing, and it gave me that report that shows the entire route.
Yeah. And what time of year did you do it?
It was actually winter, February into March.
Okay. Great.
Yep.
Great. Yeah. Again, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and a special thanks to Kim Russo, taking time out of her schedule to present this. This will be available at passagemaker.com in a few days. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and goodbye to everybody for attending this webinar.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Bye now.